Good morning and welcome to our Good Friday service this morning. It's not our usual morning prayer today for Good Friday. It's a longer, reflective service. Normally on Good Friday we would hold this service with half an hour of silence beforehand and half an hour or so, as long as you wish to make it, of silence after the service. Obviously, when you're live streaming, silence isn't great because you're just sitting looking at me at the camera. So if after this service you would like to continue with that reflective time, thinking about what Good Friday is about, please do that on your own afterwards. I will stop the live feed at the end of the liturgy. We are Easter people. We are resurrection people, but we only understand this in the light of what preceded it, what had to happen. I'd like to thank my readers for this morning: Martin, Paul, Margaret Fish, Margaret Thuzy, Tilden, and Julian Burt. It wasn't easy. Thank you very much for what you have prepared for all of us this morning. So our liturgy today is sparse, contemplative. It's a series of readings and monologues from a book called The Nail by Stephen Cottrell, currently Bishop of Chelmsford, Archbishop of York designate. You might like to light a candle. You might like to have a nail to hold during this service as we reflect on the description of Christ's crucifixion through the eyes of some of those present. If you don't have a nail, you might like to imagine a cold iron nail resting in your hand. Imagine you hold in your hands a nail that was used to crucify Christ. If you accept it, this nail is the beginning of a deeply moving and personal journey through the Passion story. In between the readings this morning, we will sing a Taizé chant and then hold silence for a while, reflection, with private prayer and thanksgiving. We begin with Peter, a reading from Luke 22, verses 47 to 62. While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man?" When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, "Lord, should we strike with the sword?" Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple police, and the elders who had come for him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him to the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, someone else, on seeing him, said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then about an hour later, yet another kept insisting, "Surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." At that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
Oh, I know what you're thinking. It would be what any normal person would think in the circumstances. You let him down. You did your own thing. You went your own way. But just stop for a minute and think what you would have done. Oh, it's easy to judge from your safe distance, but when you're in the thick of it, when it's happening around you, it's much more difficult. You find you thinking about yourself. It all becomes very plain. How do I save my own skin here? But what you probably don't understand is this. It is what he wanted. This is what he was seeking out. And I really believed that he might be, no, that he was the Messiah. But not like this. I mean, he had every opportunity to show people, but he said nothing, did nothing. And then, last night by the fire, he just looked at me. And I don't know how to read that look. So much else has happened, so much in so short a time. Washing our feet and telling us to love each other. Breaking bread and telling us it was his body. Pouring wine and saying it was his blood. Saying that one of us would deny him. And then, when Judas left, surely he must have known why. Again, nothing. He just let him go. And I was indignant. Yes, they might all slink away. They might even turn on him, but not me. I would stand fast. But I was wrong. Wrong about Jesus and wrong about myself. After the meal, he took us into this garden and asked us to stay awake. But it was too much. He always seemed to be asking me for things I could not give. So we just slept. And when they came to get him, came to arrest him, and it must have been Judas who led them there, none of us was ready. Suddenly everything was unraveling. And I either wanted Jesus to tell him who he was, to do something, to say something, or else I wanted to fight back. But to do nothing, to be just handed over like that, it doesn't make any sense. And so I thought, I don't mind telling you, I tried to stop them. And is that wrong? Are you going to condemn me for that? Don't you fight? But in that moment, I also knew that for him, being Messiah was never what I believed it would be. Not what any of us believed. And that was a dark moment. because I tried to say this to him before, and he'd called me Satan. Then I'm seized by these huge cavernous doubts, like someone has reached into my chest and put a cold hand round my heart. Is it all in vain? Is he just the madman, the blasphemer, the simpleton that others say he is? Am I not to drink the cup my Father gives me? That's what he said when they took him away. But what does it mean? What cup? What Father? I still don't know. He talks in riddles, and his riddles hurt. His words have always been an uncomfortable truth, like an irritant under the skin. You scratch and scratch, but it won't go away. And I did follow. Everyone else panicked. For the few moments after he was taken, there was mayhem. No one had anything to say, and yet we all screamed at each other like it was someone's fault. So I followed, at a distance, carefully, but it was too late. I could see it was over. And maybe I was the fool for ever believing it could have been different. So when they said to me, you know him, you were with him, you were one of them, it was easy to say no, because you see, I don't know him, I'm not with him, I'm not one of them. Not anymore. There is no them. It is over. So, answer me this. This is the question that possesses me. Why, when he turned and looked at me, did it hurt so much? Why am I so frightened? What did he see in me? What else is there to be dragged into the light? You see, he saw deep inside me, saw my stupidity, saw my fear, and he loved me. That's what it was, love. And I just don't get this love because I don't know who he is. So, if you're looking for someone to blame for the death of this Jesus, don't look here. Yes, I got it wrong. We all did. He did. Get over it. But these are the facts. He was arrested, tried, beaten, nailed down, crucified. We failed to stop it happening. We saved our own skins, just like you'd save yours. We didn't like the thought of those nails in our soft flesh, so we ran. I don't like the thought of them in his, but that's what happened. I didn't see it happen, but it happened. It's done. He was handed over to the authorities, and a Roman soldier nailed him to a tree. That was it. End of.
Peter. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. The Roman centurion. A reading from Luke chapter 23, verses 32 to 38. 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by, watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews."
Look, as far as we were concerned, it was another job. This is a place to be stationed. And believe me, at this time of year, there are troublemakers aplenty who need their wings clipped. And the religious ones, they're the worst. So just in case you're getting too comfortable on that fence of yours, think for a moment what the consequences would have been for us if we'd have said no. Yeah, but I have to tell you, this one was different. First of all, the crowds. There'd been unrest, a sort of can't put your finger on it, something in the air all week. Everyone felt it. And it was all to do with this bloke, this Jesus, the one we nailed. Yeah, last Sunday, less than a week ago, you would have thought he was God himself coming into Jerusalem. Everyone was smiling and cheering. It was all right. Oh, carry on. They even started tearing down branches from the trees and waving them like they were banners. But it quickly changed. And who is the first to notice? Muggins here, that's who. It's always us. Because when there's trouble, we're called in. He goes to the temple. I mean, can you believe it? It was like he had a real death wish. He goes straight to the temple itself, the place where these Jews really do believe some funny stuff about their God. And he tries to ransack the place single-handed, turning over the tables, calling it a den of thieves, chasing out to the money lenders and the salesmen. Well, it was like he wanted the place to stop. And I said to my mate, I said, he don't half choose his time. Only the blooming Passover festival itself, when they come in from all over the country, hires kites anyway. Yeah, see, for them, this Passover is about liberation, freedom. They remember this time when they were all slaves in Egypt. And there was this fella Moses who pulled a fast one on Pharaoh, and they all go free. And the Egyptians, their armies and their chariots are defeated. Well, I hardly need to tell you that for us Romans, this is not exactly our favourite time of the year. We are foreigners, Gentiles they call us. We are an occupying power, and they don't like us at the best of times. But Passover week, they're eyeing us suspiciously anyway, like they're thinking to themselves, it'll be you next. What happened to them Egyptians? Well, you're next in line.
So the last thing we need is some trumped up messiah from the country coming to town and not just stirring up the people against us, but challenging their own leaders too. Oh, I have to say, nicely in our pocket and do as they're told. So, no thanks to our governor, Pilate. He's a pussycat if ever I saw one. So, you see, it was bound to happen. He got squeezed. His own leaders on one side, ours on the other. All we did was the deed itself. But the decisions were taken somewhere else. What? Did you expect Pilate to bang in the nails himself? Oh, you're having a laugh. That was our job. Well, let me tell you, the crowds, so keen on him last week, well, they soon changed their mind. Once they realised he preferred the kingdom of God than giving the kingdom of Rome a good kicking, they soon turned. Oh, they couldn't wait to get rid of him. Kill the nutter, they shouted out. Well, what a laugh. Strung up by us lot for aggravating his own. We launched their boil. But, and this is a big but, I'll grant you, there was something about him that got under the skin. Well, don't get me wrong, I'm not some raw recruit who hasn't started shaving yet. I've seen and done some terrible things. It goes with the territory. And I've killed many men, some with my sword and some with my bare hands. And some, like this Jesus, I have hoisted up on a cross. Don't make no difference to me, it's what I do. It pays the bills. But he got to me. He got to me because right through his trial, and when we led him away, and even when we dressed him up in a purple gown and thought we were having a right old laugh, pretending he was a king and bowing down before him, we couldn't get to him. He didn't flinch. I mean, it hurt him. It hurt him just like any other man. I mean, he is just a man. But inside, it was like there was something else. He looked at us and there wasn't any anger. I mean, I struck him on the face and I spat at it because, well, his coolness just made me angrier than ever. But when I looked at him, all I could see was sadness. And I'll tell you this, he unnerved me. Even when we nailed him to the wood, he didn't struggle. He didn't fight, he didn't spit or shout or rage, not like everyone else. He just looked up, like he was looking beyond me, like he could see something else, like there was something sustaining him, even in the middle of it all. Well, believe me, it is a horror. This is a God-forsaken way to die. Slow and very painful. And he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And that's what gets me so angry. You see, I know what I'm doing. I know my place and I know my job. Yeah, with him there's something else, and it won't go away. Okay, so you might laugh at me for this, but I admired him. I could see why people followed him. He got ideas above his station, well, yes. And he knew he had it coming, oh, yes. But he didn't deserve it. There was a strange goodness in him. He was, if you like, a son of God. Well, if Pilate had had any sense, he'd have got us to kill that monkey Barabbas and let this Jesus go. But even then, the crowd was so riled, lusting for blood they were, I reckon they would have stoned him themselves. But if you want someone to blame, well, that's a different matter. Look to him what gave the order. Pilate, he's your man. And that's the truth of it.
The centurion. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Pontius Pilate. A reading from John chapter 19, verses 1 to 16. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God." Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on a judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Then he handed him over to be crucified.
Truth, you'll forgive me if I don't join in the merriment. It is never as simple as you think. Very rarely black or white. Not as clear as you imagine. Usually shades of grey that run into each other and collide. But truth itself, it is uncommon, elusive, like trying to catch the wind. That was Jesus's mistake. He saw it clearly, or rather, he thought he did. So take off your blinkers, stop pointing your fingers at me, and consider one of the few bits of black and whiteness in this whole sorry episode. I tried to release him. I didn't want him killed. It was what I had to do to keep the peace. The crowds had turned on him. There was no other choice. I actually quite liked the man. He had a certain steely coolness, not aloof, but assured. It was uncomfortable. Everyone commented on it. My own wife told me to have nothing to do with the man, to let him go. And, as I said, that's what I wanted to do. But events got out of hand. The crowd got ugly. Everyone was screaming, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" This man they called their king. This man they had been so pleased to see. "Do away with him," they shouted. "Do your duty to Rome. He threatens your authority. Kill him." Even his own religious leaders were frightened of him. I could see that. But they were also frightened of what the crowd would say if they dealt with him themselves, which they could have done. He wouldn't be the first person they had stoned. But they wanted us to solve the problem. They wanted their own hands clean. What a joke. I can't believe I'm telling you this, because I wanted my hands clean too. You see, this man disturbed me, and I gave him so many chances to evade the bait. But it was almost as if he was determined to die. It was as if he wanted the nails to pierce him. After a while, he barely even spoke to me, ignored my questions, spoke about a kingdom that was beyond the rule of Rome, and then shut up. Condemned himself with this little strutting, flouting defiance. But there is no kingdom. He has no power. His followers had left him, and the crowd were baying for blood. In the end, I was the one trying to save him. "Don't you understand that?" I said to him plainly. "Don't you know that I have the power to release you and power to crush you. And he said, and you have to admire the impudence of the man, you would have no power unless it was given to you from above. Though, as I say, it's not really impudence, and it's certainly more than defiance. It is a sort of madness. Only what disturbed me most about this man is that he was not mad. It was as if he had an inner something that sustained him, propelled him, made him stand up to me, stand up to Rome, stand up to his own leaders, so much so that it was as though he were embracing that cross that we gave him, holding it as if he were not just doing it for himself. That's why I wanted to release him. This Barabbas, that the crowd was suddenly so keen to save, was a monster, a murderer, a menace. But he lives, and this Jesus, the King of the Jews, dies. A plain sinner saved, a good man, a son of God, killed. What sense does that make? But I'm not going to be blamed for this. I spoke plainly. I find no case against him. I let the crowds decide. I even called for a basin of water so that I could wash my hands in front of them. I am innocent of this man's blood, I said, and I walked away. What else could I have done? There would have been a riot. So, if you want a culprit, a scapegoat, if you want someone to say, look, it was me. I hammered the nails into his hands. I am guilty. I killed him. Don't look at me. My hands are clean. Look at his own leaders. Look for the ones who handed him to me. They have the greater blame. They have the nails in their hands. Speak to Annas. Speak to the high priest Caiaphas. He hated Jesus. It was his power that was threatened, not mine. Jesus was never going to topple Rome, but he might have shaken the ridiculous charade of their own religious posturing. But I am innocent of this man's blood. Don't you understand? Innocent. Now, leave me be.
Pilate's name. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Caiaphas. A reading from Matthew chapter 26, verses 57 to 68. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death, but they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, 2 came forwards and said, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?"
In these situations, it's easy to get, how can I put it, carried away, emotional, transported on a great wave of sympathy, tolerance. But be sure of this, the wave will break, and then there will be a need for someone to take a longer view, to set this man and this event in a larger context. That is my task. I am that someone. Facts, you say. What are the facts? Indeed, a very good question. But each witness says something slightly different. So who do you believe? Yes, their stories were useful, interesting. They create the right impression, concern, alarm, to seize. But some of us look behind the facts, to the motive, to the larger picture. So let me put this to you regarding Jesus, the so-called King of the Jews. And for my witness, not the bleating of a few gullible fools who were taken in by his magic and charm. Yes, I'll give you that. He had charm, a certain way with words, but the scripture, God's word, that's what condemns him. For this little preacher from Nazareth, this Galilean Messiah, got above himself. Answer me this, if you will. Which of the prophets ever pointed to themselves? You don't know, do you? Why? Because they didn't. They always pointed to God. Even that troublesome imposter John, so proud of his wild ways and prancing in the margins where it is very easy to win friends and a few favourable reviews, pointed beyond himself. But I act in the centre stage, where decisions have to be made, deals struck. That's my responsibility, and I carry it alone. I see that we survive. What good would it be to see this jumped up Nazarene tearing up the carefully woven fabric of our equilibrium? Do you think it's easy to survive when these Roman pimps and dandies control our every move? These infidels, they do not care for us, and they do not care for peace. And they certainly do not care for God, but they do understand order. This Jesus of yours, this Messiah, he pushed it too far. He came in from the margins where we could control him and contain him, where, let's face it, he had some uses. But like a moth circling too close to the light, it was inevitable, once he came to the centre, that he'd be burned. If you're interested in knowing what happened, as you maintain, if it is justice you're after, then consider this. His death has maintained order, has kept us going. That is what we need to do. That is what we are skilled at, surviving, adapting. His assault on our order was bound to end like this. So let Scripture condemn him. Coming into Jerusalem on a donkey, flouting the Sabbath, disturbing the legitimate business of the temple, calling God Father. But more than this, and if you cannot grasp anything else about this case, then take hold of this one fact that reveals his motive. He pointed to himself. He had the audacity to stand in my presence, the high priest of the temple, the one whose role it is to mark out the coming in and the going out of God, and enter God's presence on behalf of the people, and utter the name that even I am not worthy to utter. None of us. You see, that is the point. He dared to say it in my presence, dared to say, I am. As if to be with him was to be in the presence of God. And I despise him for it, for striking at the very root of our faith. Destroy this temple in 3 days. Indeed, it was with our very faith, our very survival that was threatened. And so it's better that he died. Justice, blame, don't speak to me of these things when our very existence is at stake, and do not ask for an apology. Did you really believe that the Romans would have suffered him for much longer? Of course not. We merely hastened the inevitable. We pulled some strings. It was convenient for all of us that we brought things to a conclusion. We nailed it. History will not remember him, but we will go on. You want someone to blame? That's natural. That is, how shall we put it, reasonable. And if nothing else, I think I have demonstrated that I am a reasonable man. I see things in their context. I do what is right for the survival of our people. I take the longer view. It is reasonable that Jesus died. Better that one man die. Expedient. Or would you prefer that the whole people perish? There were no other options. He had to go. But when it came to his going, why, even his followers conspired against him. That is the other salient fact. It was all falling apart. All the cracks were beginning to show. Those half-witted peasants who followed him, even they could not swallow these blasphemies of his. And the one bright spark amongst them saw the horror of it, the damage, and did the decent thing. If you want someone to blame for the death of Jesus, then speak to his good companion Judas. And please do not think like a tabloid journalist and call him the betrayer. Why? If you care anything for the survival of your people, you will think of him as your saviour.
Caiaphas. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Judas. A reading from Matthew 27, verses 3 to 10. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to it yourself." Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money." After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price on the one on whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me.
I've got to explain. I've got to make you understand. It's not what it looks like. We had all hoped so much, too much probably, but we really thought that Jesus might be the one who could set our people free, break the bondage from Rome, renew our people's confidence, help us to see again that we are God's people, chosen, that we could again become a mighty nation. And to begin with, it was all so good. I really believed that Jesus might just be God's Messiah. He spoke with authority. He knew the scriptures. He was the first person I ever met who hungered for the kingdom of God, like I do. Not like the religious leaders with their diplomacy, their tact, their compromise. They are gutless bureaucrats. They hold us back. But Jesus was different, and it seems that he could take them on, take us forward. But then things changed. He seemed to speak as if he was more than an anointed one, even as if he was God himself, as if he had some sort of special purpose from God. And in a way, I believe he did, but not this way. He spoke in riddles about seeds dying in the ground, and then to some of us, quite plainly, about his own death. He said that if things carried on this way, then he would suffer and he would die. And I remonstrated with him. What good is dying? I said. What help is suffering? Isn't there enough suffering in the world? Enough misery? What we need is action. We need someone who can inspire the people, lead them. We don't want someone to die for them, however good he may or may not be. But Jesus was adamant, unbendable. He spoke about love, about loving to the end. But this seemed to me like rolling over. Suffering, dying, loving, even when your face is shoved in the dirt. How does that bring peace? It just strengthens the arm of your enemies. It looks like weakness. That's what I told him. I told him they despise weakness and they will exploit it ruthlessly. And he just laughed, actually laughed. I want you to be meek, not weak, he would say to me. He just didn't get it. Every day as we turned towards Jerusalem, I felt further away from him. I couldn't understand the way he was going. Then last night, things reached a head. We had everything prepared for the Passover. But before we sat down to eat, he gets a towel and a basin of water and washes our feet. I mean, it was so demeaning. Peter winced with embarrassment, and at least had the courage to protest. But the rest of us, we were like lambs to the slaughter. We let him be our servant, but we need him as our leader. We need him to give people a vision of change. We need clarity. And what does he do? Washes our feet. Tells us that we must do the same, that we must love one another. And yes, loving one another is a very fine thing, but it is not more love that the world needs, but change, leadership, action. And then, when he breaks the bread, I don't recognize him anymore. He is someone else. He is saying all that suffering and dying stuff again. This bread is my body. This wine is my blood. For me, it was the last straw. Did he want to be killed? Would he go on loving even when they arrested him, when they nailed him to one of their crosses? I think not. If I'm honest, I think he saw my disgust, maybe even guessed what was in my mind. He even said that someone sharing the bread with him was a betrayer. Well, at that point I left. I wasn't betraying anything. I was faithful to all we believed in. He was the one who had changed. We had left everything to follow him, and now it seemed like he didn't care, like he was letting things slip from his control on purpose. Suddenly, where he had been so active, so determined, he was passive, just letting it happen around him. And I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to bring things to a head, to find out what he really thought. And yes, Caiaphas and Annas had already been in touch with me. I'd spoken to them. But I'm not on their side. Surely you can see that. I'm not on anyone's side. I did this so that the truth would come out. And I know it's hard, but the truth is that he's not what he thinks he is. Not the Messiah he was meant to be. Not the Messiah we need. Because you don't change the world by loving your enemies. You don't change the world by turning the other cheek. You don't change the world by loving people. You don't change the world by washing people's feet. It was over, and suddenly he had become very small to me, an imposter. So I just told him where they could find him. When we got there, it was so dark, and him so diminished, they couldn't even tell who was who. So I went up to him and kissed him. I showed them which one to arrest. I'm not proud of that bit, the kiss, but he needed to be taken away. It was his last chance, and he blew it. He never uttered a word. I didn't see what happened next. I was far away. But the strange thing is this, he did go on loving, did go on turning his cheek, even when the nails were hammered in. That's what people said. He loved until the end. And it's funny, I feel so cold, like the shadow of his cross is upon me. And now you want to blame me for this. You want your pound of flesh. You want someone to bear the weight of it. But this is his doing. It is where loving leads, and it can't change anything, can it? Well, look in the mirror if you want a culprit. Don't heap it all on me. Haven't you been listening to what everyone else has said? You were the ones, each of you, who cheered him and sang Hosanna and waved your branches. You were that pleased to see him. Only a few short days ago, you lifted him up, and now you have brought him down. You were the ones who cried for his blood. You were the ones who wanted him dead. You were the ones who smiled in grim satisfaction when he breathed his last. If you want someone to blame for the death of Jesus, look no further than yourself. It was your sin, your pride, your refusal to love just as much as mine that put him there. Do not deny it. You hammered in the nails, every one of them, every one of you.
Judas. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Mary Magdalene, a reading from Mark chapter 15, verses 33 to 41. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, listen, he is calling for Elijah. And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion, who stood facing him, saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was God's son. There were also women looking on from a distance, and among them were Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Salome. These used to follow him and provided for him when he was in Galilee. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem.
All day long I waited. The sun made its slow course across the sky, and I waited. I stood in the shadows away from the crowd as they screamed and scoffed. I saw the hate in their eyes, and I was carried with them down the winding roads to the city walls. I watched it happen, saw them stretch him out on the cross, saw them pounding the nails into place, saw them lift him up. And all the while there was this screaming in my ears, people shouting abuse, people joking, everyone wound up. But death comes slowly, and while I stood there, motionless, fixed to the spot, punctured, everyone else drifts away. He isn't saying anything anymore. There's no magic, no fireworks, just the sun turning in the sky, the suffocating heat, and his life turning to an end. Like when you wind up a piece of catgut in your fingers, round and round, pulling it tighter and tighter until it just snaps. That was what was happening to him, and I couldn't stop it. I just waited and watched. It was the last thing I could give to him, who has given me so much, who gave me back my dignity, who saw me as me, who healed me not so much by flashy power, but by affirmation, by love. He made me a person again. He saw what I could be. He lifted me up. And now that's where he is, lifted up, like he said he would be, but no one is drawn to it. Only a few of us left, watching and waiting. When they hammered in the nails, he turned to the soldiers who were doing it and forgave them. And he wouldn't even argue with Pilate or Caiaphas or any of them, like he knew what was happening was not just about them, and they couldn't be left with the blame. And he let Judas do what he knew he was going to do. And for one last time, he even saved Peter from himself and stopped him from brandishing his sword, as if he could take on the Roman Empire single-handed. But that's what Jesus has done. He has taken us all on. I see it in his dying, and that is why I feel so wretched and tired. He goes on loving. That is the sheer, unstoppable force of it all. That is what today means for me. In the whole bloody roller coaster of this week, and especially in these last few hours, he has never stopped loving. Even when love had to be tough, even when truths needed to be told, even when he had no options left, no power to deploy, he went on loving. And that's why everyone fled. His love was too enormous, so complete, so daunting. It casts a shadow even longer and deeper than the sun itself. His light is that bright, and I just need to go on looking at it until it's set, until our hate, our greed, our envy, our spite had snuffed it out. In the end, there was only the murmuring of prayer on his lips, crying out to the God who had forsaken him. Everyone will be looking for someone to blame for this stupid waste of life, this assault on love, this killing of the man who showed me humanity, showed me God in a way I had never known God before. Everyone will be queuing up behind Pilate to wash their hands, but I know who is to blame. I know it, and at the same time I am liberated by it. You see, it was me. I watched them put the cross upon his shoulders. I watched them hammer the nails into his hands, and it was like I was doing it. I had the nails in my hands. I was holding them between my fingers and bringing the hammer down. You see, it was my stupidity, my pride, my envy, my spite that got in the way, that got it wrong and put him up there. Each one a nail hammered home. And I don't just mean me, but all the mess that make up a crowd, that make up a world. But I can only take responsibility for my part of it. That is why I am watching. That is why I am still waiting. You don't know what to do with a love like this. so we destroyed it. But I looked at him on the cross. I was at the same time convicted and at the same time released. They have taken him down now. All I can see is an empty cross, the space where he has been. I can't see him anymore. But his love went on, right through to the end, right through to the dying. Even when everything and everyone had rejected him, and he was alone in the last struggles of expiring life, there was love. And I don't know where that will lead me or what good it will do, but I see it now, for it was my sins that he hung and suffered there. And somehow, by the tenacity of his love, I am free to love again. So forgive me and laugh if you want to, but I am going to go on waiting. I am going to try to go on loving. In a way, I want to put myself up on the cross, but I don't need to. He has done it for me. He has taken all the sins, all those nails, and he has borne them, consumed them, and transformed them. That's what I have seen in his dying, and it makes me want to weep for grief that we could have been so stubbornly stupid, and for joy that a love such as this has visited our hearts. Now they are burying him, and soon the sun will set and today will be over. It is cooler now, the world a little darker. Tomorrow, the Sabbath. But I have not quite finished here. I will wait, and when the Sabbath is done, pay my respects, do my duty, offer my thanks. I will anoint him again, his body for its death. So please, don't point the finger anymore, but wait with me. Imagine the nail in your hands. Receive this astonishing gift of tenacious love, all poured out in his dying, broken for you.
Mary Magdalene. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Will you accept the nail that crucified Christ? Will you recognize your role in the drama of the cross? One of the thieves who hung alongside Jesus reaches out in hopefulness. In his last few moments, he hangs on to the hope he sees in Christ. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. To this man, Jesus replies, today you will be with me in paradise. That offer is available today. It is there for all who cry out to Jesus, for all who are penitent. In fact, it's even there if you're not feeling very penitent at all. But if you just begin to see in Jesus what God is doing, then God's offer of life and forgiveness is there for you. It is the meaning of the cross. It is the promise of Easter. All you need to do is reach out. The Lord be with you, and also with you. May God bless us, that in us may be found love and humility, obedience and thanksgiving, discipline, gentleness and peace. Amen.